The Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein has threatened to use a new long-range missile against Israel. He said its day of reckoning was coming. The 480 British hostages still held in Baghdad are doing their best to keep their spirits up. Mostly men, their only links with home are letters and photographs brought in diplomatic mailbags. They say the nearer it gets to Christmas, the more they miss home. In Hyderabad in India, at least 60 people have burned to death after extremists set fire to a train carriage. Police say Maoists boarded the train to distribute leaflets in support of government plans to increase jobs for lower caste Hindus. Kerosene was poured on the floor. Passengers died after the carriage doors failed to open. 40 survivors were taken to hospital suffering from burns. The Transport Secretary Cecil Parkinson has made a firm commitment to privatise British Rail if the Tories win the next election. At the party conference in Bournemouth, he also announced plans for a £1.5 billion railway linking East and West London.
Inside the conference centre, Cecil Parkinson produced the spate of announcements, including the go-ahead for London's first major British rail line this century.
This major £1.5 billion line will connect trains from Paddington through the city to Liverpool Street and beyond. It will transform and improve the lives of Londoners.
But work won't start until 1993, and there are those even in this conference who believe British Rail's needs are more urgent than that.
It's no good saying that we will double the roads programme. We're building greater motorways. What we need in London is better public transport, and we need it now.
That view is clearly shared by many in the audience. But Mr. Parkinson says big money is already being spent on the Underground and British Rail. He's also keen to persuade everyone that BR will soon be ready for the other grand scheme he announced, privatisation.
It's not a question of whether we'll do it, it's a question of how and when. And we're working very hard on all the options. We're developing ideas, but it'll take some time. But the problems must be got round because nationalisation is a failure.
There are many here in Bournemouth who remember that only a couple of years ago, Cecil Parkinson promised to sell off the coal industry. That as yet hasn't happened, and the obstacles in the way of the sale of British Rail are just as formidable.
The Indian government is under threat because of its attempts to reform the country's caste system, including the curbing of child labour. Human rights groups say children as young as 6 work in appalling conditions to make carpets for sale in the West. It's estimated 150,000 children are working at weaving looms for 10 to 15 hours a day for a few pence a week. They're known as bonded labourers working to pay the debts of their poor parents. The world's snooker champion Stephen Hendry has paid a £10,000 reward to a young man who recovered his favourite cue, stolen from a hotel in Reading. The youth found the cue dumped by the thief at the roadside. Hendry bought the cue for £40 when he was 13 years old. It was the only one he'd ever used. There we take a break. In a moment, the world news, which looks at the ecological crisis in Asia as the rainforests there are being gradually eroded. Join us again. Welcome back. It's 11 minutes past 5. Time for the world news, which was first broadcast to overseas viewers last night.
Hello, I'm Trevor MacDonald with the World News. We'll bring you a full roundup of the day's main international stories and a special report. The headlines: Saddam Hussein warns Israel to withdraw from occupied territories. Emergency budget plan gives America 10 days grace. And British Army says it's shot dead 2 leading members of the IRA. First, the day after Israeli troops shot and killed 20 Palestinians in Jerusalem, the Iraqi President Saddam Hussein has said that Israel must withdraw from occupied Arab lands. President Saddam warned that Israel was within striking distance of a new Iraqi long-range missile that he said could be used when the time of reckoning comes. In the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip, the Israeli army confined more than 750,000 Palestinians to their homes. Palestinian leaders called a 2-day strike. Israel blames the violence and what it called well-organized provocation and has arrested Arab leaders. Palestinians responded with reprisal attacks against Jews. Colin Baker filed this report from Jerusalem on Tuesday.
The first reprisal killing came late last night. A taxi driver shot dead on the highway outside Jerusalem. He was Jewish, his killer probably a Palestinian, say police, his last passenger. Outside Prime Minister Shamir's home in the city, peace groups made a protest demanding an inquiry into the bloodiest day of civil unrest in 23 years. There was more unrest this morning as the disturbances spread north to Galilee. At Nazareth, stores were looted and young Palestinians, with apparent disregard for what happened yesterday, continued stoning troops, but this time they were met only by tear gas. Remorse, though, is hard to find here. In the old city at the Wailing Wall, Orthodox Jews continue to celebrate the Festival of Tabernacles as though yesterday never happened. It was the threat of a march to the Temple Mount by ultra-right-wing Jews that provoked yesterday's stone-throwing by Palestinians and the ultimate police response. Trouble had been expected, say the police, yet they admit there were no senior officers present to take command and give orders when the first outbreak came. The result was that bricks and stones were met with gas, rubber bullets and live ammunition, leaving 21 Arabs dead. The police, who have now mounted roadblocks throughout the old city, have been defended by the government for doing their duty, but they've been heavily criticised by some newspapers for causing what one journal called a bloodbath. Many people here, though, see yesterday's killings as a culmination of weariness and stress through 3 years of fighting the Palestinian uprising. Though the government insists it was fueled and planned by Iraq, with the results that the Palestinian cause is once again headlines and seemingly may not be divorced from what's happening in the Gulf. Funerals are now taking place in the occupied territories, which are presently under military curfew. Colin Baker, ITN, Jerusalem.
America's President George Bush has rejected linking the killing of Palestinian demonstrators with the Gulf crisis, but he deplored the killings in Jerusalem and said Israel must show greater restraint.
It is particularly saddening, given the sanctity of the holy places and observances there, and that violence shattered all of this. And I want to echo what Jim Baker said earlier, that Israeli security forces need to be better prepared for such situations, need to act with greater restraint, particularly when it comes to the use of deadly force.
At the United Nations in New York, condemnation of Israel was almost as strong as that against Iraq following the invasion of Kuwait.
Shall we condemn? Is that enough? And even if we were to condemn, would that be enough to defend the Palestinians and their lives? What is taking place today and what took place yesterday is not new, and indeed will not be the latest act of mass genocide perpetrated by the Israeli occupation forces.
The pre-planned attack perpetrated by Muslim extremists today was intended to disrupt the delicate balance at the site and constituted a criminal attempt to strike at the Jewish public freedom of worship and religion. We regret the loss of life resulting from unbridled excitement against peaceful Jewish worshippers. Leaders on both sides are called to the supreme effort of restoring order and calm.
British security forces say they've shot dead 2 leading members of the outlawed Irish Republican Army, the IRA, in Northern Ireland. The Republicans want British troops out of the province and are waging a violent campaign for unity with the Irish Republic. 2 men were shot after a surveillance operation. 2 other men and a woman were arrested. The shooting took place when troops confronted the 5 people at a derelict farmhouse.
As a major security operation continued in the area where undercover soldiers believed to be members of the SAS opened fire, police confirmed the names of the 2 dead. They said Desi Grew, aged 37, was believed to be involved in murders, kidnaps and bombings dating back to the early 1970s. The other dead man was a former Sinn Féin councillor, Martin McGaughey, who survived a previous shootout with soldiers last March. People living in the area say they heard up to half a dozen bursts of sustained gunfire, followed by flares lighting up the sky and a helicopter flying low overhead. One man says he saw a badly mutilated body being recovered from the scene. Grew, whose brother Seamus was shot dead by the RUC nearly 8 years ago, has served prison sentences for armed robbery and terrorism. A short time ago, police said he was wanted for questioning over crimes on the continent. And a highly placed source has told me that West German police suspect him of involvement in the killing of an RAF corporal and his 6-month-old baby a year ago. The security forces have given few details of the incident, and they refuse to say what relevance a car taken away for forensic tests had in the operation. Andrew Simmons, ITN, Loughgall, County Armagh.
In the United States, President Bush has signed an emergency spending package to keep government services running. All non-essential services were shut down last weekend, while the White House and Congress haggled over plans to cut public spending. This new agreement gives the Bush administration 10 days in which to agree a 5-year plan to cut the American budget deficit.
5 hours of backroom bargaining and 5 hours of debate finally resulted in the Senate backing a budget package and a 10-day deadline for its execution. But something more than America's economic woes had finally forced them to act.
The American people don't think we're serious about the deficit. They don't think we're serious about managing the economy in a responsible way, and we've got to begin here and now with this vote to prove that we are.
It was a Democrat plan, less clear on spending cuts and more keen on tax rises, but Republican leaders recognized the need to support it.
And I urge my colleagues to vote aye for the United States, vote aye for the senior citizens, the farmers, the business people, the working men, the working women, the children, the grandchildren, who want to have a future too.
But elsewhere in the Republican camp, doubts remained.
A problem that is going to come back to haunt us in the coming weeks is that we have agreed to a budget which is supposed to be a plan and a promise that makes no concrete promise.
With the polls showing most Americans blame Congress for the budget mess, Mr. Bush took the gamble to give them 10 more days to sort it out.
Success should bring lower interest rates here and a boost for a flagging economy. Failure, and the president could threaten to shut the government down again until it's all sorted out. Alistair Stewart, ITN, Washington.
Riot police in Pakistan have fired tear gas at crowds who threw stones after gathering to see the former Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto appear in court on corruption charges. The case was adjourned until later this month. The new Prime Minister Ghulam Mustafa Jatoi hinted for the first time that the general election due in 2 weeks' time may be postponed. Human rights activists in India say children, some as young as 6, are working in appalling conditions, making carpets for multinational companies based in the West. In some factories, children are held as virtual slaves, physically abused and made to work for 12 or more hours a day. Companies are now being asked to guarantee that carpets not produced by children carry labels to that effect.
Daybreak over the Ganges, and pilgrims from across the continent come to seek salvation, a cleansing of body and soul at the steps of India's most holy river. At the same time, in a tiny shed along the banks of the Ganges, an 8-year-old called Vijay begins another day in virtual slavery. He's not alone. There are said to be 150,000 just like him, working at weaving looms for 10 to 15 hours a day. They're India's carpet children, most earning little more than a few pence a week, and some earning nothing. They're known as bonded labourers, working to repay debts incurred by their hopelessly poor parents.
The conditions of those poor children is like animals. Most of them are not given any wages. They are suffering from different diseases. They are beaten up by the masters. They are not allowed to go back to their parents.
ITN was taken to one village where children worked at more than 300 looms. Tiny fingers producing luxury carpets, many destined for the British market. One of the boys we found here was just 6 years old, torn from his family to work 12 hours a day. Right across this area of India, children toil in carpet sheds like this. It's the reality behind a multi-million-pound business, much of it done with Britain. As we left the village, we were stopped by loom owners, angry that we'd filmed. They denied the children were mistreated or unhappy. They were grateful, they said, to be paid for what they did. But the next day, a different story. In a pathetic huddle in a magistrate's courthouse, 20 children rescued from slavery after a police raid. One mother reunited with a son she hadn't seen for months. From many of the children, stories of cruelty and beatings. The lucky among the rescued are taken in by voluntary organisations who give them schooling and a chance to enjoy their childhood. But most can't escape the poverty, begging often the only alternative to the carpet sheds and factories. Mark Austin, ITN, in India.
The forests of Asia are disappearing, and at more than twice the rate that was previously believed. That's the view of a United Nations Commission, which has been looking at the problem in the Asia-Pacific region.
Preliminary figures indicate that the rate of deforestation could be as much as 5 million hectares per year, more than twice the annual rate that was assumed to exist over the last 10 years. These forests have been stripped to provide the bulk of the world's supply of teak. Attracted by hard foreign currency, hard-pressed Asian governments, like the military dictatorship in Burma, have encouraged the teak loggers. One log can be worth up to $40,000 on the world market. Forest management used to be strictly controlled, but now in many areas, logging companies fell trees virtually at will. The soil, once held in place by the trees, now flows into Asian rivers, polluting them with sediment. In 7 South Asian countries, 3 children die every minute from preventable diarrheal disease. Deforestation is also the major cause of flash floods and mudslides. 2 years ago, illegally cut logs left a swathe of destruction as over 300 died in flooding in Thailand. Prime Minister Chatterjee decided that enough was enough and banned logging in Thailand, a move that simply encouraged the loggers to plunder Burma. And as the deforestation spreads, 2/3 of the region's original wildlife habitat has been lost, causing roughly 600 animal and 5,000 plant species to become endangered.
Some business news now, and the Espírito Santo family, one of Portugal's most powerful before the 1974 revolution, looks set to regain control of Portugal's 4th largest insurance firm, Tranquilidade, which was nationalized 15 years ago. The government is selling its 51% share, and the Grupo Espírito Santo is bidding to acquire a majority stake. The Thai government has agreed on a telecommunications project intended to relieve Thailand's severely overloaded telephone system. The cabinet has agreed to a proposal by a consortium led by British Telecommunications and Thailand's Charoen Popkan Group. They'll install 3 million lines over the next 5 years at a cost of $6 billion. A settlement between 2 Japanese electronics companies, Hitachi and Motorola, to end the dispute over computer chips is expected to bring relief both to the industry and to trade relations between Japan and the United States. Hitachi confirmed it's reached a settlement with Motorola over patents, and all court cases relating to the dispute will now be dropped. And now our special report in which we take a longer look at a topical issue. And today we turn to the world of the arts. This week for $1,000, a London gallery is guaranteeing that everyone who enters their raffle gets a fine arts prize. It's an unusual marriage of commerce and culture by the Dulwich Picture Gallery, an attempt to continue their innovative education program. More than 20 major British artists have worked with children at the gallery and given their efforts to the raffle.
More than 6,000 children a year are welcomed to the gallery. Many have never visited an art gallery before, and the emphasis is on informality. David Mack is just one of 24 British artists who've agreed to produce a work for the charity raffle, impressed by the gallery's determination to make art accessible to children.
The more people you get into a place like this, the better it's going to be for the community. You know, people can find things in here that help them get through the day. Even an 8-year-old needs to get through the day, you know? So I think it's good from that point of view. You know?
In helping children to get through the day, Dulwich receives no state subsidy. Originally a private art collection, it's continued along philanthropic lines. The education programme is dependent on a team of voluntary helpers, all retired school teachers, and sponsorship.
Britain's oldest public gallery, opened in 1817, the collection is particularly strong in 17th and 18th century art, including masterpieces by Rembrandt, Rubens, Poussin and Canaletto.
Do you prefer using black and white, as in charcoal and chalk, to build up your pictures, or do you prefer using colour?
When I draw, I invariably draw in black and white, and I do prefer it. But when I make the paintings, which is an entirely different matter, I start with a white ground, and then I go through a very complicated process of applying the colour later. So it is separated out in the paintings.
What do you do it for?
Pardon?
What do you do it for?
Oh, that's a good question. An embarrassingly difficult question. The short answer is because it's worthwhile, if that makes any kind of sense.
For this particular gallery, raising money by asking artists and children to work together, then raffling the result, seemed a perfect solution.
I think people take looking at pictures for granted. It's a complicated matter. Making them is a complicated matter, but looking at them is also a complicated matter. People feel confident when they're around pictures more often than not, confident to ask questions about them, and feel at home. I mean, feel at home in a gallery environment.
With such a big pastel, how did you get such thin pictures?
Thin lines?
Yeah.
Well, look, you can do everything from this, right, to this, what? Exactly. It has an edge on it.
I like it because you get to look at all the pictures and you see how they're being made and everything. And artists can give you tips.
In another corner, another artist is at work. This time, a schoolchild is used as model, and the inspiration is a Rembrandt portrait of a young girl.
I'm having a go in a short time to as it was the painting that I noticed, particularly, to use it as my connection with the museum in the context of this project. Yeah, so.
And yet you've blocked it out with the easel, so you can't actually see it as your painting.
No, because all I really want from the Rembrandt is just the ambition of it, the feeling of it.
The shades and the details and what kind of paint you use and the position you would want us to be in. I'll see it different, because if I came to a gallery and I saw, I thought it must be a normal picture. But of me being a model to model for an artist, it's different, hard work.
None of the artists taking part are unknowns. It's a true marriage of commerce and patronage. The money goes to the educational project, but the donor is promised a piece of art that is probably an investment. The only gamble is which one you get. Patrick Proctor? Or maybe Michael Kenny? It could be the Tim Head. This venture were the investors.
A part-time soccer team from a group of remote islands with no grass pitches is preparing for more European Championship glory. They're from the Faroe Islands, population a mere 46,000. But they produced a shock victory over Austria in their first ever Championship International. And on Wednesday, they take on Denmark.
It rains on the Faroe Islands 3 days out of every 4, and 95% of its exports are fish. There's never been a homecoming like it. But these islands, which can boast the oldest parliament in Europe, with self-governing status under Denmark, can't play a single match at home. Because there's so much rain here, the grass gets churned into mud after only one game of football. So about the only place you'll find a decent turf pitch here is on the top of houses for insulation. The pitches made from ash scattered throughout the island don't fare any better in the wind and the rain. They have to play on synthetic surfaces, and they're banned in international competitions. Now shopping centre celebrities, the captain of the team, who works at a dentist, is also a part-time folk singer. His latest disc is going straight up the charts. The winning goal scorer helps out on a forklift next to a shrimp factory, and one of his fellow forwards is an electrician. What's their formula for success?
All the players in the team are proud of representing their country.
You're winners.
Yes.
Qualities like stamina, character, reliability have always been highly regarded in this place.
All qualities needed for the next match against Denmark, and the football season has just finished here because it's getting too dark. David Chater, ITN in the Faroes.
And that's the world news. From all of us here, goodbye.
The World News was presented by Trevor MacDonald. Another break now, then the headlines, followed by a selection of stories from American television. Stay with us.